Hello friends, I'm Ihor Havryshchak from Channel 24. Today is October 22nd and we're live. Please be active, comment, like, and share our conversation. This helps more people see and understand what's happening in Russia. I'd like to welcome our guest, political strategist, Abbas Gallyamov. Abbas, hello.
Про що йде мова, що відбувається в Росії, процес і не лише. А я вітаю нашого гостя традиційно, це є політтехнолог Abbas Gallyamov. Abbas, здравствуйте.
Good morning, Igor. The BRICS summit starts today in Kazan.
Сьогоднішнього дня в Казані починається саміт BRICS.
Putin is a man who wants to be always in the spotlight. So his excuse that I'm not going to the G20 because I'll distract everyone doesn't fit. Again, Putin spoke to the media of the BRICS countries. He was asked about relations with China, and he was told, "Don't you feel like a little brother?" He replied that we have excellent parity relations. That's how it hits Putin, and we realize that with the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, he has become a little brother to China. He wanted to be on an equal footing with the United States of America to solve the world's problems. And now they don't talk to him. This is still not the achievement of the goals that Putin wanted. Well, temporarily he was in the spotlight, like a teenager who broke out on stage and smashed dishes. In this sense, he probably achieved what he wanted, that is, in some part, in terms of his emotions.
И в этом смысле, наверное, он достиг желаемого. То есть, вот в какой-то части, наверное, вот с точки зрения эмоций своих, да, это же такое эмоциональное желание, просто вот быть в центре.
It's an emotional desire, just to be in the spotlight, to satisfy some complexes. It can't be a rational desire, just to be in the spotlight. In this sense, he may even be emotionally satisfied. He feels that he has achieved his goal. The whole world is doing it. From the point of view of rational and long-term interests, of course, one cannot be satisfied with this. He is pulling chestnuts out of the fire for China, and probably to a lesser extent for Iran. For China, there's no doubt about it. China has nothing to lose. Iran, of course, has serious problems with the current situation. Perhaps, relying on Putin's support, it took this gamble and supported Hamas' attack on Israel. As a result, he now finds himself in a situation where he has two hands cut off.
Пошел на вот эту авантюру, поддержал войну Хамас.
Hezbollah has not been completely destroyed, but it has certainly been radically weakened. It is now unable to offer serious resistance to the Israeli army. Hamas has been virtually wiped out, and its leadership has been destroyed. If Putin had not supported Iran, he might not have embarked on such an adventure. In this sense, he may have lost in some ways, but China has not lost in any way. China has won in the sense that Russia has become dependent on it. Russia has lost its Western markets, Gazprom has lost its Western markets, and now it's close to bankruptcy. It is moving towards bankruptcy and does not know where to put its gas. Now it is ready to sell it to China. The Chinese themselves are ready to build this Power of Siberia 2 pipeline, and the Chinese are turning their noses up because they are not satisfied with the price. Although compared to European offers, there are huge discounts. I think they are now waiting for gas to be given to them for free, and they will also be paid for agreeing to take Russian gas. So, from the international arena in general, China has had very serious problems with confrontation with America, especially during the Trump era. America has been very serious about China because America's strategic adversary is, of course, China, not Russia. Russia, like the teenager who breaks the dishes, at some point finds itself in the spotlight. However, it does not become a serious player because of this. The scale of its economy and military power do not allow Russia to be a real threat to America. China is seen primarily from an economic perspective as a real threat to America. That's why, before Putin embarked on this adventure, America was very serious about China. That's it now. America does not care about China. On the contrary, it is appealing to China, especially when Putin starts threatening nuclear war. And who do the Americans call? They call the Chinese and ask them to rein in this lunatic, metaphorically speaking. And that's it. Now China is in the position of being asked to do something. They cannot do without it. When you are asked to do something, you can always roll out your demands. This is how the dialogue is established. In this sense, while Putin is playing the role of the main bad guy in the world, Xi is not the worst guy. So when you solve the problem with the worst guy, at some point you turn to this guy, who turns out to be not so bad. In general, on all fronts, if you look at it, China looks like a winner. I don't know. Maybe it has problems with North Korea. Perhaps North Korea, taking advantage of the strategic impasse in which Putin finds himself, is trying to get out of China's influence by diversifying its relations with Putin. I am just speculating. I'm trying to imagine where China could lose, but I'm not saying that this process is happening. I am simply not an expert in the field of DPRK-China relations. I do not exclude that this factor exists, but it is not of primary importance. Even if there are drawbacks, they don't outweigh the benefits China is gaining from the current war. China is keen to keep the conflict under control to prevent it from escalating into a nuclear war, which would destabilize the global economy. The threat of nuclear weapons poses a significant risk, particularly to China's export-oriented economy. A decline in demand and consequently a slowdown in economic growth in China will hit the population very hard. The population is mostly very poor, on the verge of poverty. As long as the economy is growing, they get something. But as soon as they stop getting something, the population may become dissatisfied. Here I would like to remind you that revolutions usually occur at times like this, when there was growth at first, and then suddenly it stopped. As Tocqueville said, on the eve of the French Revolution, economic growth was such as it had never been, at least for decades.
Пока экономика растет, но ему что-то перепадает. А как только ему что-то перестанет перепадать, ну, население может оказаться недовольным. Тут я напомню, что революция обычно происходит как раз такие.
And at this point, the appetite comes during a meal. The appetite has come, and there is nothing to eat. That's when revolutions break out. So for China, the suspension of growth is a very serious risk factor. It's important for them to fuel this conflict so that it bubbles a little, but not boils, so that the boiler doesn't accidentally blow up. In general, Putin, of course, has made Russia strategically dependent on China because he has quarreled with everyone else. China is the only one with whom he can cooperate and circumvent sanctions.
И, в общем, Путин, он вот в стратегическом плане, конечно, поставил Россию в зависимость от Китая, потому что он со всеми остальными перессорился. Китай единственный, значит, через кого он там, с кем он может сотрудничать, там, обходить санкции.
This is a key factor.
То есть это ключевой фактор. Там есть Турция, есть Индия.
There is Turkey, there is India, of course there is Iran, which is under sanctions itself, so it's not helping much in this sense, but there are others who are helping. But China, of course, is the key player in this case. So, of course, there are problems. It's clear that Putin will not recognize them. He will keep telling us that they have equal relations with China. But who believes Putin? On your Facebook page, you wrote very well about regimes. In authoritarianism, the formula "I'm not interested in politics" is a formula of loyalty, while in totalitarianism, it turns into its opposite and becomes a form of disloyalty. Because in totalitarianism, the authorities want much more from people, not just non-participation, but active support for their actions. You say that Kremlin circles are allegedly pushing Putin toward totalitarianism. I'd like to ask you a question. Don't you think Putin is 72 years old or so now? He realizes that time is running out and he wants everything to happen faster. He is becoming more categorical, deliberately going for conflicts with Russian citizens. If we talk about the Kurdish operation, he does not see it, and he is throwing a lot of effort and money at pushing the war forward exorbitantly. All military experts say that this is not the way to fight. But still, do you think he doesn't care about all this because he's running out of time? Igor, I wouldn't say that he always chooses the most suicidal, most radical solution when choosing between options. For example, YouTube has been slowed down, but not completely blocked, and they did not hold a second wave of mobilization. There's a lot of talk about the need for it. Generals are asking for it, but Putin is not doing it. So something is preventing him from doing so. Maybe it's a general understanding that these hawks who pushed him into the war eventually got him into an adventure he doesn't know what to do with.
В какие-то моменты встает в позицию ястреба, в позицию радикала, ну, Навального убили, например, да. Но в какие-то моменты он все-таки, ну, этого не делает. То есть, то ли ему мешает, ну, вот это общее понимание, что все-таки эти ястребы, которые его толкнули в войну, в конце концов, стравили его в авантюру, с которой он не знает, что сейчас делать. И, может быть, ну, в значительной степени из-за этого, я думаю, пострадал Патрушев, которого, ну, де-факто отправили на пенсию. Вот. Может быть, эта причина такая стратегическая.
Perhaps this is why Patrushev, who was de facto retired, suffered to a large extent. Maybe it's a strategic reason, or maybe there are other reasons, including what I wrote about. He does not want to be a hostage of the security forces. If you constantly choose the toughest solution out of all the possible ones, you will quickly end up being completely dependent on these security forces. This is what politicians call praetorianism, when the nominal ruler is the one who actually controls the country, and the one who grips these bayonets is the one who actually runs the country. The guards, which, as you know, during the reign of this system in ancient Rome, changed emperors like gloves, sometimes several times a year. It is clear that Putin does not want to do this, but it can be said more broadly that this is not just about Putin. Why do autocrats all over the world try to hold elections and portray some kind of competition? Theoretically, they could do none of this, relying on the security forces. But no, the stupidest do it, and those who are smarter realize that elections and reliance on the people allow them to be independent of the security forces.
Вот это вот выборы, там, опоры на народ, это как раз то, что позволяет им быть независимыми от силовиков.
When the source of your power is the citizens who voluntarily vote for you, you have the security forces in your fist, so to speak. If the security forces know that your citizens hate you, they will overthrow you at any time without their help. Then it turns out that they need you less than you need them, and you become dependent on them. In other words, Putin, while strategically moving toward totalitarianism, is becoming dependent on the security forces. But he does it rather reluctantly, realizing that there is a problem. So he's going like this, 2 steps forward, 1 step back. That's how I see things. Although again, this is a very non-linear process. Igor, it moves in zigzags. At some moments, apparently he gets hot, gets emotional.
Вот у меня такое представление. Хотя, повторюсь, это очень нелинейный процесс, Игорь, еще. Это он такой вот зигзагами. То есть
Perhaps he thinks that success is possible, success is close, and he decides to push on, taking radical steps. For example, he kills Navalny, thereby creating a fundamentally new political reality in Russia, where the opposition leader is simply killed, not just imprisoned. For many years, he was tolerated at large, even allowed to run in elections. Let me remind you that some 10 years ago, he was still running in elections. Then they opened a criminal case against him, banned him from running in the 2018 elections, then imprisoned him, and then killed him. The process itself, I repeat, is taking place, but it is zigzagging. At some points, Putin is disappointed in the Estrabit course he is pursuing. This was very evident in May and June, when he significantly pinched the hawkish camp and strengthened the position of the technocrat camp during the post-election reshuffle. He was forming a new cabinet and making changes in the administration, likely due to disappointment over the election results. Putin probably sensed serious legitimacy issues despite the manipulated numbers. Navalny's funeral and signatures supporting Nadezhdin, the only anti-war candidate who gathered enough support, highlighted the artificiality of Putin's regime. This situation reflected Putin's fear of any real opposition, including Dontsov. Additionally, there was dissatisfaction with the current military course, as an offensive in the Kharkiv region that began in late May was overwhelmed by June, necessitating a retreat.
Когда, просто реально нельзя зарегистрировать даже Надежду на Донцову. Ну, это смешно, Путин боится Донцова и Надеждина. А так же получилось. Да, то есть, отчасти, видимо, вот с этим было связано у него такая неудовлетворенность этим истребиным курсом. Отчасти еще тогда, они, помните, попытались в Харьковской области начать...
And then the Americans were counting on the fact that American supplies were blocked. Remember, there were no supplies for 6 months, and then suddenly, at the end of spring, they were unblocked again. It turns out that the hawks who were wiping their hands and saying, "That's it, Vladimir Vladimirovich, we've bent them over," were wrong. They didn't. And now the Ukrainians are getting help at the front. I think the combination of these reasons led to his hawkish policy being very strongly condemned at the time. Now again, there is an unevenness. On the one hand, there are steps that indicate a clear tightening of the screws on society.
Ну, сейчас вот такой неравномерный, да, то есть, с одной стороны, есть шаги, которые свидетельствуют о явном, так сказать, вот, закручивании гаек в отношении общества, да, а с другой стороны, многие шаги...
On the other hand, many steps, such as a new wave of mobilization or bans on YouTube, are not being implemented, but are only being outlined and discussed. It is clear that the Kremlin is playing, and judging by its actions, the processes are ambiguous. For example, today, the Kremlin's top sociologists published poll data on the childfree ban.
Значит, Кремль, в целом, главные кремлевские социологи опубликовали данные опроса относительно вот запрета childfree.
This is one of the indicators that the hardliners are trying to ban this ideology, just to make it punishable by banning the propaganda of this ideology. And in this context, this morning, or rather last night, a poll was published that showed that the majority of citizens, 48 to 43, oppose this ban. Yes, I mean, in general, if Kirienko had said not to publish it, he would not have published it. But he published it. Yes, so they kind of sent a signal that society is not happy with this prohibitive measure, you know? So the Kremlin found it possible and beneficial for itself to do this, which means that no final decision has been made on the issue of banning child-free. And the internal struggle is still ongoing. Yes, and this poll once published shows that the majority of citizens are against the ban and against punishment. It's a tribute to get off the hook. Don't you think it's a very dangerous game the Kremlin is playing with Kadyrov, who always gets what he wants? It's a dangerous game, but the Kremlin can't help but play it, because what's the alternative? It means that it is necessary to take the situation in Chechnya into its own hands. Yes, it is necessary to remove Kadyrov, to protect Kadyrov's people, and to bring them to the state of the average Russian region, which is sitting there and is afraid to breathe. But what kind of resources are needed for this, right? God forbid it should catch fire, so to speak.
Вот сейчас Wall Street Journal сообщает, что Москва отдала окружению Кадырова, кадыровцам, целый металлургический комбинат в Мариуполе на разграбление. И вот у меня вопрос. И также, кстати, Министерство просвещения Российской Федерации планирует через 2 года ввести арабский язык в единственный государственный экзамен в качестве 6-го по выбору. Вот опять-таки исламизация, влияние Кадырова, вот то, что пол Мариуполя, оккупированного Путин, отдал Кадырову, это совместный дерибан, это дань, это чтобы отвязался. Вам не кажется, Аббас, что это очень такая опасная игра Кремля с Кадыровым, которому всегда отдают то, что он хочет?
Игра опасная, но не играть ее Кремль не может, потому что, а какая альтернатива? Ну, то есть надо тогда брать ситуацию в Чечне вот в свои руки, да, надо убирать Кадырова, зачищать кадыровцев.
Yes, Putin is afraid of this, because he remembers how the wars in Chechnya, the first and second, destabilized the Yeltsin regime and eventually led to the fact that Putin's Yeltsin family had no other alternative but to give power to Putin. Putin doesn't want to be in the same situation, so he prefers to pay off Kadyrov. Yes, this is basically a tribute. It's, let's say, buying loyalty. I guess that would be more accurate. That is, Putin is buying himself calm in this area and buying himself loyalty. Kadyrov is, so to speak, being bold. And yes, the story of the publicly announced blood feud shows that this destabilizes the Putin regime, of course. Yes, and he nevertheless thinks it is possible to do it.
То есть Путин покупает себе спокойствие на этом направлении и покупает себе лояльность. Кадыров, так сказать, наглеет, дерзит, да, история с...
He hasn't crossed any red lines. He's only mentioned it once and hasn't killed anyone yet. This has led to a testing of boundaries, with Putin trying to narrow them while others seek to expand them. This struggle is happening alongside a parallel process of buying loyalty.
Во всяком случае, не убил пока еще никого. Вот, поэтому вот все проверяют друг друга, все пытаются расширить границы возможного, ну, то есть Путин пытается их аккуратно сузить, и Кадыров пытается...
Danone stands apart from the rest of the food industry. Azovstal may no longer produce anything, but the metal still comes from there. Kadyrov's influence is growing as the Kremlin shows weakness. When he senses this vulnerability, he becomes more assertive, extending his hand for more power.
Остатки Азовстали, а там, хотя она и производить что-то, наверное, уже не способна, но металлолом-то оттуда вывести
Аббас,
было можно. Тоже отдали Кадырову.
Но Кадыров хочет больше. Сейчас вопрос о Вайлдберге.
The fact that he is now, well, I just said it, I repeat, the fact that he now considers it possible to do such things in public and destabilize the situation in the country is an indirect indicator that Putin is weak. I mean, Kadyrov feels that he can play this brazenly. You mentioned Nadezhda and Navalny. Yulia Navalny's wife gave an interview to the BBC, and she said the following. If she returns to Russia, she will run for president of the Russian Federation. If she leaves, Putin will disappear. Don't you think that a politician who wants to be liked, who wants to have a good career, should act, not wait? I perceive these words as waiting. If I come back, if there is no Putin, then I will run for president. On the one hand, you are right, but on the other hand, you have to be realistic. A normal politician shouldn't demonstrate a complete disconnect from reality. Everyone understands that free elections and the possibility of Navalnaya returning to Russia in the near future are impossible.
Хорошую карьеру должен действовать, а не ожидать. А вот я воспринимаю эти слова как ожидание. Если я вернусь, если не будет Путина, то тогда я пойду в президенты.
Ну, с одной стороны, вы правы, с другой стороны, надо же быть реалистом. Политик не может...
Yes, so she demonstrated adequacy. It's not a perfect interview. It's hard for me to comment on it because I've only listened to it so far, but it's long. I've listened to about a third of it so far.
Это невозможно. Да, поэтому, она продемонстрировала адекватность. Не идеальное интервью, мне трудно его комментировать, потому что я пока прослушал, оно же длинное, я прослушал пока где-то третий, я потом отдельно, так сказать, могу с вами поговорить.
I can talk to you separately after I've listened to the whole thing. As a political strategist, I have a number of comments, but in principle, none of them, at least so far, based on what I've heard, are such that I would conclude that she has no chance at all. No, she has some problems, but they are obviously secondary to Alexei.
Нет, у нее есть некоторые проблемы, очевидная вторичность по отношению к Алексею. То есть, с одной стороны...
On the one hand, she is like his wife, who picked up the banner that had fallen from his hands. And yes, she is walking, trying to move on with this banner. On the other hand, she evokes such human sympathy because she claims to be president, and the president is not a deputy, he has a different set of claims. Yeah, that's how they can vote for an MP. Come on, we like you, to hell with you. In the case of the president, the voting model is different. People vote for him based on the fact that being a good person is not a profession. Yes, that is, you have to represent something.
То есть надо из себя что-то представлять. То есть люди понимают, что от президента слишком многое зависит, чтобы туда ставить человека,
People understand that too much relies on the president to appoint someone unproven in strength and effectiveness. While the absence of these qualities may become a problem if protest sentiments escalate, they have not yet reached that level in Russia. The situation is trending towards a revolutionary state, but it hasn't fully manifested yet. I remember, for example, voting for Zelenskyy. Yes, he also did not carry a factor of power. He was voted for simply as an alternative to this cold system for his alleged honesty towards people. Yes, as he demonstrated in the movie, how he would behave.
Честность по отношению к людям, да, как он в фильме это демонстрировал, как он будет себя вести, да, вот. Значит, или вспоминается история желтой революции в 86 года на Филиппинах.
This means that either the history of the Yellow Revolution in 1986 is remembered. This is the first color revolution, what went down in history as the color revolution, when dictator Marcos was overthrown and was overthrown in the elections during the post-election protests by Corazon Aquino, the widow of the murdered opposition leader. There are very direct parallels with our story with Yulia Navalnaya. He was the leader of the Philippine opposition and was killed by a sniper upon returning home after living abroad. A year later, Corazon Aquino, who had been a housewife like Yulia and stayed out of politics, attended the elections, but refused to go on stage, waiting for her husband backstage. And she was convinced. She didn't want to go at first. She was fundamentally apolitical. She said, "What good am I? What kind of candidate am I?" She was persuaded by collecting 1 million signatures in support of his movement. Her mother-in-law put pressure on her, and her mother-in-law, I think it's called Yes, and her husband's mother. In general, they say she also pressured her in a family way, so to speak. Well, in the end, she ran and won. The people who voted for her were looking for a sincere person, not a strong president, and that is what drove them to choose her. She showed sincerity in her weakness, which helped to overthrow the dictatorship. These disadvantages could turn into advantages, as her tragic background and name recognition create sympathy. Although Alexei's high anti-rating, pumped up by the Kremlin, will be a hindrance, it is not an insurmountable problem amid growing protest sentiment and the regime's falling popularity. There is no easy answer, but this is the political reality. Thank you for the conversation and analysis.
Сама фамилия, то есть проблема узнаваемости решена. Но, конечно, высокий антирейтинг Алексея, который кремлевцы накачивали в течение долгих лет, конечно, этот фактор тоже есть, и он, конечно, будет ей мешать, но, повторюсь, все это, особенно в условиях роста протестных настроений и падения популярности.
I would like to remind our viewers that political strategist Abbas Gallyamov was with us. Of course, you will like this video, comment, subscribe, share. It is important. This is how YouTube algorithms work. My name is Ihor Havryshchak, and we will see you on Channel 24.
Аббас, спасибо вам за этот разговор, спасибо за ваши ответы, за ваш анализ. И, как всегда, спасибо, что нашли время проговорить важные процессы. Спасибо.
Спасибо, до свидания.
Нагадаю нашим глядачам, з нами був політтехнолог Аббас Галямов. Звичайно ж, ви поставте цьому відео лайк, прокоментуйте, підпишіться, поділіться. Це важливо, так працюють алгоритми цього YouTube. Мене звати Ihor Havryshchak, з вами ми побачимось в ефірі 24 каналу.